So let's go ahead and get started. Last session of the day, the easiest one to do. Yeah, are y'all ready for? I just have 222 slides to go through, so we'll be just fine together. All right, now we're gonna be doing some interaction because we have to at this point of the day, and we'll be having some discussion and working through some things together, and then that'll get you to the last session or the last keynote. So let's jump right in. I am going to be doing some polling. We're going to do some interaction that way as well. So if you have permission to use your phones, if you text Velocity to 22333, and those instructions will show up again here in a little bit, but if you want to go ahead and get connected to that, so Velocity to 22333, just text in. So I'm David Hawks. I'm from Austin, Texas. Work for a company called Agile Velocity, and our focus is around helping organizations that are going through some kind of agile transformation or retransformation, doing coaching training. I'm also a certified Scrum trainer, certified enterprise coach. All that means is I can train people, but I live and breathe this stuff. I don't just stand up in the front of the room and do training all day. So what I want to share with you today are things that I've learned, the patterns I've seen over and over again as I've helped organizations through transformation, and kind of the patterns or the anti-patterns, if you will, and how do we get past that as organizations? Because I think there's a lot of failed agile, actually I would say most agile transformations are failing, and it's because, my biggest premise is because they're focusing too much on trying to implement all the practices in the picture. Right? You know, like if we do all these things, then we will be agile. You know, I had a client that said, you know, the goal was if we launched, our goal this year to be agile is we need to launch 20 agile release trains. And if we do that, then that means we're agile. Well, okay. And do you think at the end of that year, they met the mark? They did 20 release trains. Do you think they were any more? They were probably a little more agile, but do you think they were done? Just because they achieved that? No, right? So it's not about the practices. What we're going to focus on today is it's about the outcomes and developing capabilities within the organization. So I want to do a quick poll and just get a sense of kind of what the current state of agility for your organizations is. And I'm going to pull up my app here as well. So think about where you would put your, think of a team or a set of teams that you're working with in your organization, and how would you kind of describe your kind of current state of agility? Is it what I call superficial agility, where I call this like we put agile lipstick on a waterfall pig, right? Where we're going through all the motions, but we're not really any more agile than we were before? Or is it that we are improving agility, like we're actually trying to actively get better? Or is it that we are in that state, what we call there predictable agility, like we're getting done every 2 weeks, like we actually have predictable, we can get 5 things done every 2 weeks, or are we at that fast, we really reduce cycle time, we can get features out the door fast? So what I want you to do is just text to that Velocity to 22333, and then if you've already done that, all you need to do is put in there A, B, C, or D of where you think you are, and we'll start seeing what kind of results we have here in the room. So far, we look like we've got about a third of the room that is in superficial agility, up down to a quarter, 63% that are improving agility, 13% predictable, and nobody is associating themselves with fast. Why do we think this is, right? This agile stuff is hard. I mean, it's really difficult for us to get here, but I've been running this survey now for last 2 years of talks that I've done. At the beginning of most of my talks, I've got over 500 organizations, and often the pattern is, the good news is you're under the average on superficial agility. That's usually 30%, and improving is around 50%. And predictable is about 15, and fast is less than 5 if zero is pretty common. And there's actually a fifth state that I don't even put in the survey because we're not even gotten to fast yet. Right? So what we see is a lot of organizations kind of getting stuck in this improving state. And what we're going to talk about is why is that happening? Why are we getting stuck there? So the reason for that, if we just look at common change curve, the Satir model, we start in status quo. What happens when we introduce change? Do we get better or worse right away when we introduce new things? We always get worse before we get better. This is called the period of chaos and resistance, and it's a natural human reaction. Right? If I come into your organization, or think about the first time you were told you were going to do Agile, right? Or you're going to be a Scrum Master, or you're going to be a product owner. At that, we might be interested and open to it, but at the same rate fearful, right? Because we knew how to play by the rules over here. We knew how to win at this game. We knew how to play this game, and then all of a sudden the rules changed, and we're not sure if we can be the hero we used to be. Like we used to be great, and we're not sure if we can be great in this new world because we don't understand all the rules. So that's a natural human reaction. And I'm thinking probably everybody in here is a change agent or a change champion in your organization. If you're at this conference, you're probably causing change on others. So you've got to recognize you're causing this pain curve on everybody else. So you need to think about what are you doing to motivate them to want to go through this curve. Because if you just come in and say, hey, I've got this great thing, we're going to do Scrum, so here's how it works. You think people are motivated by a new process change? Like, oh, I'm so excited for new process, please tell me more. Right? As opposed to focusing on the outcome and the benefit. How is Scrum going to help them? And so whenever we're motivating others, we always need to think about the what's in it for them. What's the message that we have of how is Scrum going to help this development team, if that's the change that we're talking about. Then we get into what we call integration and practice. It's kind of like down here is when the team finally realizes, like, we do need to break our work down into smaller chunks, but do you think they're good at breaking work down into smaller chunks just because we realized that we should? No, so down here we suck at it, right? It's a new skill that teams have to develop, and we have to practice it in order to get better and ultimately drive to a new status quo. But what we have to focus on is what are we trying to achieve? And the achievement isn't that we're doing all the things, right? It's not that the goal isn't to implement Scrum or to implement SAFe or to do Kanban, right? Those are solutions that might be the right solutions, but if we just focus on trying to do them, what happens is we get a lot of mimicking behavior. Like you read the Scrum guide, it's only 18 pages, it looks pretty simple. You think you're doing all the things because you're not an expert, and you just think you're doing all the things, so you say, all right, we're done. Right? And that's what leads to a lot of superficial agility. So what we've done is we started to look at those patterns, both from an organizational change management standpoint and from a agile adoption pattern perspective, and created this kind of lens to look at an agile transformation that we call Path to Agility. And so the first thing that we need to do is this first stage we call align. We need to focus on the why. Why are we changing? And is it compelling? Because if we're about to ask everybody to go through this pain curve, if we're not all bought into this mission, this compelling reason, the compelling reason isn't to be agile. I don't know how many times I've heard a CIO say, when I go ask him, like, why are you trying to do this? To be agile. Like, what does that mean? They're using big A Agile or little A Agile. And most of the time they're using big A Agile, right? And they just mean to implement a process, which isn't going to be motivational. So we've got to be aligned around a purpose, and it needs to be something from a business outcomes perspective. We need to deliver faster and be more responsive to the market, because if we're not, our competitors will be, and we're going to get disrupted in our space, right? Like, what is the compelling reason for change? Or we don't have very good employee empowerment and therefore not very good employee engagement. And if we don't fix that problem, we're not going to be able to retain and attract top talent, which means we're going to have some real challenges trying to achieve our strategic goals that we have. So we've got to align around purpose, and then we get into a stage of learning. The easy part of learning is the knowledge. And that's what too many organizations focus solely on. I don't know how many times our sales hotline rings and somebody says, hey, we want to engage with Agile Velocity. Can you come train my teams? Right? They think if we just come train the teams, then we'll be Agile. Right? And it's like, well, training's one thing that's going to give you knowledge, but that doesn't mean that you can perfectly practice it. Right? It takes time for us to learn those things. And what's more important about the learn stage is, are we creating a culture of learning? Right? A culture of continuous improvement. That we're having meaningful retrospectives and we're continuously improving not only at the team level but the system level, the kind of team of teams level, if you will. Are we learning as an organization? And that's the culture that we really got to focus on, but we're not going to be able to get that energy around that if we don't have a compelling reason for change. Because what's going to happen when we get down here and everything starts to get really difficult? Where do you think we're going to go? We're going to be like, this sucks. Right? And everybody's going to want to go back here. And that's where 30% of y'all were in superficial agility, because you started down this, and there's another curve around change that's like the energy curve, and the energy is really high in the beginning. Right? People are excited, there's something new, it's going to solve all our problems, and then all of a sudden it crashes down, and it kind of intersects right here. So we get down here, everything gets really painful, and if we didn't have a really compelling reason, we're not going to persevere through the change, and all of a sudden we're going to go back, or we're just going to stay down here and languish, which is why 50% of y'all were stuck in improving agility. Right? We're just down here churning, right? And we're not persevering, because this is when things start getting really difficult. It's like we get down here, we're starting to learn, and we identify we don't really have fully cross-functional teams. We still have component teams. We don't have all the right people on the team. We still have we have shared services teams, but they're not really working in a supportive way of our team. Like, we start seeing these organizational problems that the teams can't change on their own, so it starts to surface up to the organizational level, and then what happens? Nothing, right? We don't change the organization, so then what signal, if leadership doesn't remove that impediment as an organization, what signal does it send back to the team about how serious we are about this Agile stuff? They're like, we're not very serious, because they're not making any changes, any significant changes. And this is one of our biggest challenges, is that in the Agile space, most transformations over the last decade or so have been very focused solely on the team. Like, if you can, again, back to that story, the sales hotline rings and they said, can you come train my teams? It's like, we could come train your teams, but if we're not actually impacting the whole organization, right, up to the leadership, we're probably not going to get very far. The third stage is what we call predict. And we put predict before accelerate, right, before speed. Even though the number one thing that comes out of executives' mouth when I say, what's the number one reason, business outcome of why you would do this Agile thing? They say speed. We want to go faster. We want to get more. But we got to get predictable first, because if we're not very predictable, we say go faster, right? We're just creating more noise in the system. So predictability is all around is all about getting the volatility out of the system, right? If we can get the volatility out, and we're doing complex things, so we're never going to be like a factory floor, assembly line in terms of volatility, but we can definitely reduce the volatility about how many interruptions are happening, how many dependencies are across teams that are causing unnecessary wait times, right? All those types of things. How do we get the volatility out of the system so that we can start optimizing the flow through the whole value stream? So predictability has got to come first, and not like we know exactly what we're going to deliver 6 months from now. That's not the predictability I'm talking about. I'm talking about we know that our team can deliver about 5 features every 2 weeks, like clockwork, and we can get 5 things done every 2 weeks. And we're predictable. You figure out what are the next 5 things. We don't care, right? But we're predictable in the way that we can deliver. Then we can optimize for speed, and I mentioned earlier there's a 5th stage that I didn't even put on the survey, which is what we call adapt. And this is where we're really focused as an organization on, do we have true organization agility? Have we changed the people practices, the funding models, right? Are we, what we just learned about at our lunch keynote, right? Are we working in an experiment-driven way where we're making decisions based on objective data, not subjective CEO says, I think this is the highest priority, right? We're adapting based on what the market is telling us, what the customers are telling us. I think most, we talk about customer collaboration over contract negotiation. Y'all heard that statement before, right? We suck at that in the Agile, in our Agile world. I would say that we've done a really good job of shortening the feedback loop with stakeholders. We have not done a good job of shortening the feedback loop with customers, right? Who comes to your sprint review? Raise your hand if you've got customers that come to your sprint review, right? All right, we got 2. Woohoo! So we got, what is that? 2% of the room, right? Like, and my guess is some of those that raise your hand, I have customers, they're internal, like the product is used internally, right? That's easier, so that's great. If we have no excuse, if our product is used internally, then we totally should have customers there. It's a lot harder when customers are just anybody out there, right? So we look at this lens to try and figure out where are we today, right? And so you can start to kind of think about where is your organization, and different teams could be a little bit further along this kind of path. But it helps to identify what are the things that we should focus on next. So we're going to be digging into this model a little bit more. So we're going to look at why are companies struggling to get through this, because a lot of the things I'm not necessarily telling you too much new. I might be wrapping in a little bit different wrapper. So the first thing is I see companies that are implementing solutions without clear desired results. Right? Again, focusing on the practices, not what are we trying to achieve and how are we going to know we were successful? How is that going to impact the business? So if we don't have clear desired results, we start to see these types of things, right? Lots of frustration, silo optimization, resistance because nobody knows why we're doing it, right? It's just like, I don't wanna, you can't make me do this new process, as opposed to getting everybody aligned around the mission and focus together on trying to get better, right? And so we won't see a ton of gains, and we'll see that like push back to superficial agility without it. So what I want you to do is just text in, how would you, if you were to go in to an organization and say, I said, go look at this team or this, this part of the organization and tell me, what would you look for if you were if I told you to, how would you know if they're doing good agility? What would you be looking for? Just text in, you would know they were doing good agility if you saw, and just kind of text in what are some of the things you would see there. And again, if you want to join in, just text Velocity 2233. So how would you know that a team is doing good agility? So self-organizing would be good. Aligned teams across the company. Minimum standards. Clear problem definition. Happy. Backlog grooming, that includes the PO and dev teams. I thought, but we could just make that more efficient if we just have the product owner meet with the dev lead, right? Okay. Change how they do things based on evidence, right? Based on data, not just something. Delighted customers, clear KPIs. That person was probably in the last session about metrics, right? Yeah, so a lot of good things here, right? Delivering regularly. Some of the things that we have up here are what I would call more business outcomes. Some of them are what I would call more kind of like outcomes of agility, like things we could see and capabilities if we're from an agility perspective. And some of them are a little bit more practices, and that's what we're going to explore here a little bit deeper. So, whoops, I went the wrong way. So, when we start thinking about elements of this lens from a path to agility perspective, the first thing we focus on is business outcomes, and we're going to look at these here in a second, that break down into agile outcomes and into capabilities. And we think that if we look at these different levels, anytime we have a big, large problem, what's the thing that we need to do? We need to break it down. So what we're doing is saying, how can we break down that somebody, a leader wants speed? How do we know that ultimately, over here on the right, we have agile practices that we need to implement? But I think what's the problem is we skip this, right? We skip the middle. We go from we want speed, and as an agilist, we say, oh, well, then you need to do DevOps, right? Or you want speed, okay, so we should do Kanban, right? And all of a sudden, we're jumping to the practice, and then, again, how do we measure success? That we're doing Kanban good enough. How would we know? So what we want to focus on is, what is the capability, that maybe the capability is something like we can iteratively plan, right? And if we can iteratively plan as opposed to big upfront planning, that's a capability. That we can release continuously, that's a capability that we can have, right? As opposed to just saying we're going to implement the practice. And if we do those will enable the capabilities, drive the outcomes, and help us accomplish these goals. So what we're going to do is, when you think about what you typed in as what defines good agility, I want you to think about, did you describe something that's we implement, right? Luckily, there weren't a ton of these, but if somebody wrote, there's daily stand-ups, right? That would be a practice. There's one thing that I would probably look for as a practice would be, do they have regular retrospectives, right? That's a practice that I would like to see. But the capability might be that the team is continuously improving. That's what's more important, because we've all seen retrospectives where they're not very effective. And they're just going and it's a big gripe session, and there's nothing actionable out of it. So they might be meeting every 2 weeks, but they didn't develop a capability of improvement. That's what's more important to achieve an outcome, to ultimately get to, all right, if we're regularly retrospecting, maybe the business outcome is we have a continuous improvement culture. Right? Our company has a continuous improvement culture. That might be something that's important for us to have. So on your table, you've got a stack of cards that look like this. And these are not souvenirs. Please do not leave with these. Are not like, hey, all right, put them in my bag. I need these for a talk next week. But somebody grab these, and what we're going to do is pull out the cards that are yellow at the top. So there's 9 cards that are yellow at the top, and what you're going to do with these as a table team, and I think every table's got at least, if you have at least 3 people, 4 people, y'all have 2, you can choose to play together, or somebody could join the table up front. But what I want you to do is I want you to think about your context as a company, and I want you to kind of pick out which are the 2 that you think, if you were doing this exercise with your leaders, you would say, this is why this stuff that we're doing, this agile stuff that we're doing, is really compelling for us. It's going to help us in these 2 areas. These would be the most important 2 areas. So just use the yellow cards, and I'll give you a few minutes to do that, and then we'll check in on that answer, and I'll be walking around if anybody has any questions about anything. Okay, here's what I'd like you to do, is text in what was your number 1, and you might not have all agreed because you have different contexts that you brought into the room, but for you, which one do you think was the most compelling? Sorry, you're missing letters on there, aren't you? All right, here we go. That helps. It helps if there's letters. So which one would you say is the top one for your organization or your context? Go ahead and text that in, and we'll take a look at what we've got here. I might have biased y'all on speed, but that is definitely the one we see the most, is around speed. Looks like we've got 2 seconds and customer sat and predictability, and apparently nobody cares about employees. All of your cultures are so great that your employees are fully engaged. No problems, right? Okay, so 50% at speed, right? Now, as you started to discuss these, did you have any conversation that there might be some dependency across these things? right? That one, like, so a lot of times what we might do is when we frame this conversation with leaders, this is a game you can kind of play with leaders, or if you're thinking about like kicking off a transformation or even with a team, like, why are we doing this stuff? Why do we think it's compelling? This having a business outcomes type of conversation before you just start pounding like, you need to do retrospectives and you need to do sprint reviews and you need a product owner and you need this. Like, why? We gotta tie these things together. So having that conversation, we might say ultimately we're trying to move the needle on customer sat. But but sometimes I'll frame it and say, but what do we think we should focus on in the next 3 to 6 months? Because customer sat is kind of the lagging indicator, if you will. So sometimes we might say, well, we need to get more predictable so that we can get to happier customers, right? So it might be that depending on the lens you use. So that might be something that you use to kind of frame that up a little bit. But there is a dependency. There is dependencies across these things and something to think about. And here's one that I want to really highlight. Nobody picked employee engagement. But if you don't have employee engagement, do you think you're going to be able to accomplish any of these other things? Right? So employee engagement might be the place to start. That ultimately will lead to customer satisfaction as we work through all of these elements. So that can create a really interesting conversation within your organization, within a set of leaders, about why. Why are we doing this? What we then have done is taken at these different kind of areas and looked at what are we doing from an aligned perspective at these 3 levels. And we're going to explore these 3 levels here in a second. So let me jump past that real quick. And so the number 2 impediment that we see is organizations are not approaching as an organization-wide change. And I mentioned this a little bit where we're focused just on the team level. And what happens is, and I mentioned this, what I call empowering the resistance, where like the team escalates something to management, management doesn't do anything about it, and then it's like, oh, this is a fad, they're not serious, it's going to go away eventually. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Teams hit a ceiling. And so what we got to look at also is not just kind of where we are along those stages, but also the team level is the most understood. That's where we have the most definition of practices, the most like proven case studies, and things like Scrum, Kanban, applying. Everybody understands we should do some stuff at the team level. We're starting to see a lot more frameworks playing at what we call the system level, and the system level is what we're calling like the collection of teams, right? The team of teams, where Scrum of Scrums comes into play, where an Agile release train would come into play. But are we optimizing the system, the flow of value delivery through the system, right? Are we putting the practices in place, and are we aligning the organization and fixing the organizational structures that are helping us optimize the system level? So we're starting to see some good practices showing up here. The third area, and potentially the most important, but the one that we do the least amount of work in or have the least impact in right now as an Agile community, is what I would call the organizational level. The leadership, the mindset, the cultural shift. Right? The people practices, HR practices, the finance practices. Are we shifting those as an organization, right? And how this is tying into our overall strategy. You don't have to raise your hand on this one, but how many of you have a lot of good Agile down here inside of a waterfall container up here, right? It's like we're doing Agile, so we're doing Wagile, right? And it's like, all right, we're doing really good Agile, and then you go in there and you're like, and we have annual budgeting of projects that fund the year and fill up our whole capacity for the year. But yeah, we're really Agile in our 2-week sprints. Are we? Right? So we got to look at all 3 of these levels. And when we think about a transformation, we think about, are we optimizing the transformation in an Agile way? Are leaders working together? We call forming an Agile leadership team, or if you're familiar with Kotter's leading change model, like a guiding coalition that's looking at, are we optimizing the whole organization and the system within that? Are we managing that with a backlog? Are we improving? Right? Those are all things that we look at. And so on your table, you've got, we're not going to look at the dark blue cards, but there are some there's 3 shades of blue. You're picking the middle. So if have the non-colorblind person at your table, I know that these shades of blue are not great for those of us that are colorblind. So we're looking at ones, they do say learn in the top left corner. So you're looking for, how many cards we have here? 6 cards that are in that learn stage. And what I want you to do with those 6 cards is what you're going to do is you're going to order them from the top, or the ones that in your company is the weakest ones, to the ones in your company where you're the strongest. Right? So weakest to strongest. And again, you have all different company contexts, so there might not be an exact right place, but try and work through that together. Take those 6 cards and try and stack rank them, where the one at the top is the thing that you might be the weakest and might need to put the most focus on. Okay? Everybody clear on what we're doing? Yep. All right, let's give that a shot. Okay. It looks like most of you at least have the top of your list done. So let's go ahead and text in. Which one did you have at the top? And maybe it's not the one at the top, but it would be the top for you. So which one is the area that you would say is the weakest for your organization and potentially is where the most focus should go? So let's go ahead and get that text in. There we go. So let's look at results here. Okay. All right, so we got two towards the top here, action-enabled and team empowerment. And action-enabled, we got some horse race here going on. All right, cross-team coordination. Yeah, it's coming in. All right, now a two-way tie. All right, I'm going to give it 10 seconds. All right, so action-enabled is really about that agile leadership team. And this comes out if you're interested in kind of change management. One of the best ones out there is Leading Change by John Kotter. There's a book around that, Kotter. And what we talk about here is, are we empowering action? Are we enabling change across the organization? Are we removing organizational impediments with urgency? And do we have the mechanisms in place for that to happen? Like, do teams even know where to escalate issues? That isn't just the hierarchy of the organization, right? It can't, if for this change initiative that is so massive and so impactful to happen, it can't just be part of everybody's, part of their day job, right? We've got to be very intentional about it and managing it. So that's what that one's about. Cross-team coordination is, are the teams talking? So I don't know, I had a group one time where we created new, they were component-based teams. We switched to feature teams. They were all probably still in a desk area space that was probably not that much bigger than this room. And all of a sudden they started complaining about how they didn't know what any of the other teams were doing anymore. And it's like, y'all are sitting 10 feet away. Like, at what point did we say stop talking to each other? But it does help to create certain forums like a Scrum of Scrums or a sync type of conversation for that. So those would be, but again, are we achieving this capability? I don't really care about how we do it, right? There's lots of different ways about how we do it. And some of us as Agilists get too hung up on, well, SAFe says we should do it exactly like this or whatever, mechanic we're kind of looking at. And it's not as important about, again, the practice as much as do we have good cross-team coordination? And how would we know that? And so we started to take each of these and break them down into smaller capabilities that you can see on the back. Actually, I probably didn't point out that there's a front and a back, and some of y'all probably played with the back and not the front. So there's a description side, and then there's a capability side. The capabilities then break down into cards that have acceptance criteria on them. So how would we know that we've achieved it in a good story without getting into the how, acceptance criteria without the how? So let's look at one other area, which is, somehow I skipped over the slide, but so not creating focus is impediment number 4. And what happens is when we're not creating focus, right, we have no slack to improve, right? We're busy on so many things. We're being interrupted all the time, right? We're not going to be able to get to a level of predictability. We have no flow through the system because we're trying to work on so many things at once. We don't have any ability to forecast, which means we don't really have any way of making informed business decisions around things. So that means slow time to value. So what we talk about with leaders is, I think most leaders are trying to manage the runners and not managing the baton. So if you think about a relay race, right, and the baton is akin to the work, right, the feature. If we managed for the cycle time of the feature, as opposed to, are all of our developers busy? Are they all at their desk coding? Right? Is everybody? I'll kid you not. I had a CEO at one of our clients who came and asked, if we send all of our developers to typing class, will we increase our velocity? Right? Because this is the bottleneck, right? How fast their fingers are moving. It wasn't that CEO changed his mind every week about what the highest priority it was, right? So if we need to optimize the flow of the work through the system, and this is what's kind of difficult in our world. If we were managing a factory floor, we could see, with physical goods, we could see where the bottlenecks are, right? Things are stacking up, things are piling up. But what happens is we just put all that stuff in Jira, right? How many people in here use Jira? Yeah, okay, right? We put it all in Jira, and then it's kind of out of sight. Right? And we have what we call virtual goods, but we can't see it. That's why creating physical boards are so impactful, because all of a sudden we got to post it for everything that's in flight, and we're like, holy crap, we have too much WIP, right? We have too much stuff in process. And often we create a board that only has visualization of a subset of the process, right? The 2-week dev sprint. Does anything happen before the dev sprint? Yeah, things take forever to get to the team. And does anything happen after the dev sprint? Yeah, I've had teams where it's like 2 weeks of dev followed by 12 weeks of deployment. Well, all right, let's keep optimizing this 2 weeks? No, we need to optimize the 12 weeks of deployment, right? So we need to focus on the baton, not the runners. So we've got one last exercise here with the predict cards. So these are the lighter color. And again, it says predict in the top left. And I just want you to look at these real quick. You kind of know how this game works. And I just want you to figure out which one's the number one, which one's the big gnarly one, which one's the one that's most important to you, so you don't need to stack rank them this time, but just kind of pick out which of these, what do we got here, 7 of these, which of the 7 do you think would be the most important one for your organization to focus on? So give that a shot. We'll take a minute or two. Okay, have we narrowed down to the one we think is the most important, or that maybe our organization needs to work on? So you guys know the drill. Let's text that one in. And you could do different ones at your table if your organization is different than kind of where the table went. But let's go ahead and see what we've got here. Okay, so ability to focus, surprise, surprise. It's, right, that one, 50% we've got ability to focus, but then Agile, it's easy to blame those guys up there, right? Like, those guys up in the organization, but that is where a lot of the challenges are, because, again, most leaders, they read something. They see the Agile promises, we're going to get more for less, or deliver double the value in half the time. Y'all ever heard that saying before? And so they say, I want that. And then, even that, that book was written by one of the founders of Scrum. So let's implement Scrum, right? And so we implement Scrum. Where do we implement Scrum? At the team level, right? And so so there's a lot of stuff. And even again, for decade, for over a decade, agility really has been focused at that team level, right? And now we're seeing large enterprises who did a team level transformation 4 years ago. Our biggest client right now did a team level transformation 4 years ago, and now they're calling us back, in and saying, okay, now we need to do it at scale, right? Now we need to scale Agile. And the thing is, while we could argue that, all right, well, 5 years ago they should have done it right, was the organization really ready to do it right? Do you think they learned a lot about the team level Agile that now helps them understand what we already knew 5 years ago, that here's what they should have done, but now they understand it and they can engage in that. So that's what's really important. All right, so now let's wrap up with the last one, which is actually 4. So no method to the madness. And so what we see is a lot of times, even as a early coach, when I went into an engagement, I would say we were hired and we went in and did smart things, right? I just kind of came in, assessed the situation, came up with, hey, here's things I think you should do, but I didn't really have method to my madness. We now know enough about the patterns that we've seen over and over again that many of us as coaches started to develop and say, you know what, there's a consistent way that we approach things. And that's really what we've started to kind of put together into Path to Agility, is to say, all right, if we don't have a method to madness, how do we know what success is? How do we know where we're done? How do we know where we are? How are we prioritizing what we should focus on? What is our roadmap? How are we going to roll things out? Right? And so we got to look at that. And we need some kind of roadmap to evaluate where are we. There's an advent of all these assessment tools now. Assess your agility. There was a talk today I went to about how to assess your agility. And we do that too. We're a consulting company. We're not stupid. People are asking for it. We'll come in and assess your agility, right? But in a positive way to figure out what do we do next, right? We need a framework of being able to figure out what are we going to focus on next. And so that's what the map starts to build out, is for us. And if you look on the back of any of those yellow cards that you had, on the back of the yellow cards are kind of highlighting, hey, if this is the thing you're trying to achieve, which of the areas are where I should focus on next, right? Which of the Agile outcomes would help me achieve speed? Which are those things? And then that could help us start to prioritize what are we focused on. And especially if we pick a couple, there might even be a correlation. But there is a dependency, right? We're probably not going to get faster time to value if we haven't reduced complexity of the system. Right? We're probably not going to get a predictable cadence of delivery if the teams aren't taking ownership of their process. And we won't get there if we don't have good team formation and expectations and team agreements, all those good things we do when we kick off a team. But even if we can't do that if we don't have the right teams created, aligned, focused on value. We could create good team. We did a real good team kickoff with a database team that can't deliver any value on their own. Well, that's not really going to help us get to faster time to value. So we've got to look at that spectrum and try and tie things together. And that's where this kind of model comes into play to think about. So I think that was it. All right, yeah. So if you're interested in more information, we've got some free downloads about how to get the business outcome cards or to get some of the team level kind of stuff if you want to use this as a tool. Just kind of text in your email and we can send you the slides and more information about how you can use this tool with your work and other information about kind of transformation challenges. Happy to share that with y'all. So just email that in and we can get that to you. And that's all the stuff that I just said. And that's some of my contact information. David@agilevelocity.com is the way to get a hold of me. And happy to chat about any of this stuff. As you can tell, I kind of like trying to figure these things out and these challenges. So thank you for the time today. And that's it. Right on time. Boom.